Hello, I'm Howie Sheriff, and welcome to another program from You Call This Yoga's Internet TV talk show. We're thrilled this week to have a local teacher and world traveler who brings yoga off the mat. Carrington Jackson is primarily, but not exclusively, operating out of Blue Lotus Yoga, a partner of our organization, where she also teaches teachers, workshops, and programs to advance wellness and world peace. We'll bring Carrington on in just a little bit. This is an interactive experience for us, not only Carrington and I, but for you, the viewers and listeners. We invite teachers, yoga practitioners, as well as people that are curious about yoga, because the whole theme is about creating accessible yoga. Accessible yoga can be practiced in pieces, meaning you can take elements of yoga, and that's why we have pearls of wisdom that Carrington and our prior guests have shared, as well as nuances in mindset, as well as how you can bring yoga off the mat into the world. Our phone number here is 919-518-9773. You can Skype in at Computers 2K Voice, and you can log in on the chat box on this Nissan Communications website that you've already logged on to. Let's take a moment to just settle in and get ready to meet Carrington. In a little while, we'll also be sharing Neamon's Sponsor Spotlight, who has been sponsoring our show for several weeks and will continue into the future. We'll get to that fun and yum segment later. Let's bring on Carrington and learn a little bit more about how she was first introduced to yoga practice and some of her journey in her earlier years of practice. Welcome, Carrington.
Thanks so much for having me, Howie.
It's a treat.
I was a dancer growing up, and so physical movement for me was just a part of, it felt natural to me, it felt home to me. It was a way I could creatively express myself. I danced through high school, and somewhere in college I kind of dropped away from it. And I tried to get back into it in my early 20s, but it was a challenge, and there was a yoga studio that opened up right around the corner from where I lived. I thought, I think I'll try that. And it was a Bikram class that I went to for a couple years, and it really felt right. And then from there, the journey through yoga and all sorts of different styles was born.
And what part of the country were you living?
I lived in Denver at the time, and went exclusively to a Bikram studio there for a couple of years. And then I was traveling in Chicago, and I thought, I'll drop into a yoga studio there. And that studio was an Ashtanga studio. But at the time, I didn't know that there was really any difference between yoga styles. I thought yoga was yoga. So I dropped into the Ashtanga studio, which was very, very, very different than the Bikram studio. And then that was the awakening of like, yoga is a very broad spectrum of movement and breath. And that's when it was like, let's go exploring through this.
And yes, for many, it is possible that they do not have a distinction between Bikram and Ashtanga.
Yeah.
And though the show isn't essentially about that, but could you explain some of the differences and how those might have seemed accessible and how our audience may approach them?
Yeah, so Bikram is a practice. It's 13 standing postures and 13 seated postures with a few different breath patterns, but it's always the same sequence. So if you're a type of person that likes to know what's going to happen, not big into surprises, that might be of interest to you. It's definitely when you know what's coming, you're more likely to, for some, you're more likely to kind of relax into it, to trust the process. So, if that speaks to you, then maybe check out to see if there are any studios, Bikram studios, that are close to you. It is a heated space, so do know that going in. The first time I went in was 105 degrees as you walk in the room, so it did take me aback. But if that sounds appealing to you, go check it out. Just go exploring. Ashtanga it is also a set sequence, but this sequence is moving with breath. So with every action, there is a correlating breath of either an inhale or an exhale, and you hold those poses for 5 breaths typically within each one. So it becomes more of a meditation in motion. And for me as a dancer, that was really appealing. And Ashtanga was really the beginning of Vinyasa yoga, which is really popular today. All the power yogas, the Vinyasa flows, all of that was really born from Ashtanga because it was this meditation and movement, linking that movement to the breath. So if you're more inclined to, kind of move with your breath and more fluidly, then Ashtanga or a Vinyasa practice might speak to you. So yeah, just exploring is the best advice I could give about how to find a practice that works for you.
Mm-hmm. Viewers and listeners, any comments about these modalities and how they may seem accessible, or any tips that you can share? We welcome them. But let's get back to Carrington until then and wonder, well, from Ashtanga, what next? How did you develop?
Well, it was so interesting. I was towards the end of my stay in Denver. I had found the yoga studio, the Ashtanga yoga studio in Chicago, and found one back home in Denver. And then when I moved to North Carolina, gosh, 14 years ago, maybe, a long time, I was doing Ashtanga, but then I found a Vinyasa yoga studio. And at the time that I tried it, I was not interested in the unknown. My personal life was very, I don't want to say chaotic, but it was unstructured and it wasn't grounded. So I found that the Ashtanga practice, even though it was moving with breath, it was the same sequence. So it was something I could count on. It was very grounding. It was very calming to me. So the Vinyasa flow of the unknown, where the teacher really just decides what she or he wants to put into the practice, that was unsettling to me. However, when my personal life started to slow down a little bit and get grounded, I revisited that Vinyasa practice and that flowing practice, and I felt like, oh, this is good now. I can handle this. And that's when I really transitioned, and not only just as a student, but also a teacher, in teaching that more spontaneous, fluid flowing practice.
So there has been quite a progression in terms of perspectives and styles.
Definitely.
As a dancer, did you have any chronic injuries or just nagging residuals from that practice?
I didn't. For whatever reason, genetics, DNA, whatever, my structure is very balanced. Typically, when people are prone to injury, it's when there's an imbalance. Maybe they're too strong, or not too strong, but they have a lot of muscle power, but less flexibility, or vice versa. So when there's an imbalance, that's where the wounds, those are the places where you can get wounded or injured. For me, though, I really have a balance of flexibility and strength, not one more than the other. That's not to, I'm not the bendiest of backbenders, and I can't lift a ton of weight, but I'm somewhere in the middle that keeps me healthy, and that's just fine by me.
So the concept of balance, viewers and listeners, applies on many levels, whether it's that physical, within the physical, and emotional or spiritual. There's ranges to operate in. Carrington was fortunate. I could say that I've come from a history of lots of traumas and have been in perpetual search for balance. I know that intrinsically my physical element is off, and I can sense that it's often affected my emotional and mental states. So it's not always necessary, viewers and listeners and teachers and students, that we have this extreme element within, because often you might have something lacking on the other side of the spectrum. Carrington, could you describe how you were inspired by certain teachers and how your teacher training process developed?
Sure. I was reading one day, let's see, 12, 13 years ago, maybe 13 years ago, the Independent Weekly, I think it was the name of it. It was an independent newspaper in Durham, and I saw a spot for yoga teacher training. And at the time, I was doing medical research with a drug company, and yoga was really just a way for me to be a student and be creative and expressive. I saw the ad and I thought, I'm supposed to do something with this. I don't really know what it is, but I'm going to do it. So I took the 8-month teacher training, and I got my 200-hour certification. And then actually the week after I finished my teacher training, I got married. And then about a year and a half to 2 years after that, I had my son. So for an interim there of about 2 years, I taught yoga and I continued doing research science. When my son was born, I just shifted towards only teaching yoga. About 5 years after I finished teaching, or I finished my 200-hour, that's when I began my 500-hour program, which was actually very different than my 200-hour. My 500-hour certification was with two Iyengar-based teachers, which is, it's not a fluid motion like vinyasa. It's very structured. It's very centered on alignment. It's therapeutically a wonderful practice. If you do have injuries and you're wondering how to get started, definitely look up Iyengar teachers, because they know everything. They know every modification and every tool to help make yoga accessible. Yeah, so really from there, I've had some amazing teachers. I would say the most influential teacher I've had her name is Shawn Korn, and she teaches out of LA. I took a workshop with her many years ago at a yoga journal conference, and I only knew her because I recognized her curly hair from a yoga magazine. And in that 2 hours, she really showed me what spirituality means. When I grew up in, God and religion was a very scary place, and it kind of terrified me, actually. But she was the one who really showed me God is truth and love. And I said, okay, I can get behind that. There's no one damning me to a certain place. It's really just about loving people and loving yourself and acting from that place. So she continues to be a teacher. I travel with her and assist her, and we're friends. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't learn something when I'm with her.
Well, that's a beautiful inspiration. We should all be so inspired. And inspiration is nearby. We don't necessarily have to travel cross country. So viewers and listeners, I encourage you to check in with Carrington or your local teachers, or even teachers that you might connect through media. There is inspiration abounds. We're going to move towards our first commercial, our Pearl of Wisdom from Carrington, who will give you some insight on how she likes to start her day.
I always like to begin my morning without my phone, without the internet, as a way to kind of prepare my body, prepare my mind, prepare my heart for the day. So my morning ritual, even while I'm laying in bed, I open my eyes and take a good big stretch, and then I just close my eyes, reclose my eyes, and connect to my breath. And then my first internal thoughts, my first internal stream of consciousness is a prayer that I learned from a teacher, Marianne Williamson. And it is, where will you have me go? What will you have me do? What will you have me say? And to whom? And it really is a way for me to prep myself for what I'm here to do, not to get caught up in my own drama or my own agenda, but really to be present to the direction my life is supposed to take that day in order to serve the greater good. And so that's how I start my morning, and it is a way for me to collaborate with love and divinity and the connection to all things.
So, viewers and listeners, as you have heard or seen, Carrington has found a way to integrate her spirituality without the sense of burden of religious dogma. Not to say that all religions have dogma, well, they might, but that there's ways to take the principles of whatever your religion is, if you have one, and incorporate love, and that could equal your practice of yoga for you or the community. I still invite you to consider checking in with Carrington for other nuances by calling 919-518-9773 or Computers 2K Voice on Skype or our chat box on your computer. Carrington, can you elaborate a little further for folks about creating these accessible intentions in the morning and how that is the practice of yoga?
Sure. You know, if you think about, you wake up in the morning, most people will take a shower to cleanse their bodies, and they'll maybe have some kind of breakfast, water, tea, coffee, whatever, to kind of get the fuels going. For me, and I think for many, it doesn't stop with the body. It has to keep going with the mind. So that morning meditation, if you have 2 minutes, 3 minutes of just getting quiet and getting still, if that's your yoga practice today, that's exactly what needs to happen. If you incorporate some aspect of prayer or spirituality, or even an intention, maybe you have someone in your life that really could use just some good thoughts around them, then you take that 2 minutes to send some good vibes out to that person. You know, that in any time you're linking into the bigger picture, it only contributes to the greater good, and it not only serves whomever you're directing that energy to, but you're also serving your own heart and your own sense of purpose. So for me, it's a non-negotiable. There has to be that collaboration with that higher spirit every day, or else there might be a place to, within that day, to pause and kind of divert into maybe drama or gossip or something that just doesn't serve anyone. So I start that way, and usually I start as I mean to go on. So that's how it usually goes.
And for you, do you have a special spot at home that you are inclined to start your day? And also, how would you suggest other aspirants of this practice approach this process?
For me, you know, the morning prayer I actually do in bed before anything happens, before my son wakes up, before my husband leaves. It's all right there in a very peaceful place. I have a spot in my home where I do my daily practice. Where I do meditation, I have crystals and candles, and it's quite a scene. So I do have a place like that in my home. But I think for anybody who's looking for a place to get quiet, it doesn't really matter what your surroundings in, because you're going inside. So your surroundings could be your car. If that's a place where you can get some quiet time during your workday, then head to your car, because really that wherever you are is secondary to where you're going, which is inside. So I would just say, you know, for those of you who are trying to get started, just carving some time, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes to start, and really having that be the direction that takes you into this practice, is because that's really, for a lot of us, is the biggest challenge. Is we think that we don't have the time, which usually means we need to create more time for that.
Right. It's almost as if it's the obvious omission that if you can sense that you're out of the gate with the first bell and you're already into the physical, then have we really fostered our intention for the day other than getting to the finish line?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if I'm hearing in my head the George Harrison within you and without you, and that the day starts within to develop the without, and we can get captured in the without and be void within.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's so profound, I'm going to have to stop speaking for a few moments. And bring it back to Carrington, who has her practices, and then she experienced this 500-hour training. So as you became this more advanced teacher, did you have a particular intention of who you wanted to teach or where you wanted to go with this extra capacity?
Really for me, I didn't have a specific population or community that I wanted to teach towards. Really, for me, it was about bridging communities. So not just folks in Raleigh or not just folks at Blue Lotus, but really I really felt called to bring communities together to bridge the gap between cities, between neighborhoods. Everyone has their place where they go work out or where they do yoga or whatever. And that's great. You get into a routine, you have teachers and friends that you like to see. But there is such a sweetness when we have these moments at big yoga events like what we just had at Yoga Fest, where we can actually meet people who are practicing, the same yoga, but in maybe a different way or with different people. Going exploring through our area I think it's just one of the gifts that comes from these kinds of events that bring communities together. So really, for me, that was the direction my teaching practice was meant to go, is the bridging of gap, the bringing people together, all people, all races, all religions, all body sizes, all inclinations, all orientations. To me, that's when it's rich.
Mm. And when did you start with international travel and sharing of the path?
So the first international teaching gig I did was actually with Blue Lotus. We, the owner, Jill Sockman, and I led a yoga retreat in Tulum, Mexico. And that was our first foray into teaching out of the U.S. And it was an adventure. And we learned a lot, but it was really, that was the first experience that we had doing that. And from yoga retreats to traveling with my teacher, it's just kind of been this really beautiful unfolding of opportunities to meet people, to see different parts of the world, to collaborate with, learning what they're doing, and they're learning what we're doing. And anytime I travel, whether it's in the U.S. or anywhere in the world, I always try to find a yoga class to see what's going on, because for me, this life is about learning, and I can't even stop for a second because there's just so much to see and to experience. So really, the innate curiosity of what's happening in the world which is what led me to the international travel and the bridging of the travel and the yoga.
Mm. Well, leading into some bridging and travel, my understanding is that you've been to the Middle East, in particular Israel, but possibly other countries within the past year. Can you give a little insight into that experience, how you got inspired the first time and also the return trip?
Sure. Yes, I've been to a few different places that have been kind of interesting. In the beginning of 2016, I went to Cuba for a week as part of a yoga immersion with that community. So it was also a service trip. It was also, just a way for us to learn and discover what's happening in that part of the world. But I went with my teacher, Sean Korn, and there were about 20 of us who explored all that Cuba had to offer. It was truly an immersion of culture, of politics, of religion, and the yoga scene. It was everything. And then this summer I went to Israel for the first time, and that was really just kind of a personal. I was only there almost a week, so it was really just about exploring. However, I just went back in early March, and that again was with my teacher and Marianne Williamson and some other amazing, incredible people. That was really where we explored, where we learned. Again, it was just an immersion of every possible aspect we could get our hands into. And for me, I'm half Lebanese, and that that has always been something interesting, but it really didn't mean anything to me until I got off the plane for the first time in the Middle East, and I felt my DNA reorient to something that it knew that my mind didn't know, but my cells did. And so the first trip and the second trip are really, for me, an exploration of what it means to be of that highly spiritual, palpably spiritual land. And it's, for me personally, the yoga practice is very much steep in spirituality. So it was just a way for me to feed myself, to fill my cup spiritually, so that I can go back out into the world and teach or collaborate or create whatever it is that I'm supposed to do on that day. Really, the travel to the Middle East was something really amazing that filled my cup for me to be able to do that, what I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, viewers and listeners, we're going to shift to some of the pictures that Carrington had shared with me, and she'll have some comments for that. Listeners, I guess you'll just have to hear about it. But we do encourage you to call in and explore more of Carrington's path. 919-518-9773. Amnon, can you share those pictures?
It looks like a home, but it's actually a tomb, and it's an amazing, beautiful tomb where it really is breathtaking. And there I was with my teacher and some other Jordan, and it was a yoga class that we taught at Zatari Syrian refugee camp, and that was just such an amazing opportunity to be with the girls there for just a small chunk of time. The camp that we got to visit, all the parents were just trying to give their kids some kind of normalcy. And when we got to experience those sweet girls with the smiles on their faces, with as much horrific hardships as they've had to endure, their heart was still beating, and their faces were still smiling, and that was just the purest. We She was teaching them, I think it was peace and love and a few other words that she had written, and it was really just a sweet interaction. If they would call it a temple or a church or something, but it was a spiritual home. And it was interesting because one by one, we were all just kind of drawn to this place, and we sat quietly. I lay down, some people sat in meditation, but you could really feel the energy and the vibrations pulling you to stop and take it in. And it was, some things are just indescribable until you're there, and that was absolutely one of those things.
That seemed spiritually scrumptious. Well, on the theme of being in the Middle East, and even now learning of some of Carrington's lineage, let's shift over to our Neomond Minute and feel some of the exuberance of Middle Eastern cuisine. But just soon, we'll just gonna have to settle in for just a little bit more. Neomond has been sponsoring You Call This Yoga events and programs this year and further into the year. They're located in Raleigh, and they've been a wonderful partner at YogaFest, NC, Yoga Fest Raleigh, and also some of our ventures with them, such as this show. So we look forward to your support of Neomon. And a little bit more about her experience in Israel. I have a question. Was there any issues with the different genders in teaching youth in Israel or the community?
Well, we didn't when we were in Israel, we didn't have any interaction within the yoga community, so I can't speak to that. However, when we were in Jordan, um, we were in the Zachary Syrian refugee camp, and in this particular section we were in, it was a Muslim section. Many Muslim, I think they were all Muslim families, so we were separate. That we were with the girls, we were with the women. We didn't interact with the men. We did get very specific rules about how to engage with men. No shaking of hands, just as a way to offer a sweetness of a hello or something. You put your hand on your heart, and that's kind of the what you would do instead of a handshake. So we did get some kind of rules about how to interact, but within the yoga community, we were primarily with the women within the Muslim section of the camp.
And how was languaging addressed?
So we had an interpreter when we needed one, but many folks spoke English that we interacted with just on the street and wherever we went. But we did have a guide that did act as our translator. When we were in Jordan, I did take a separate trip to visit the family of a Syrian family who just moved to the United States in August from a camp. So I did go to visit their family in Jordan, and I did take a translator with me because there was a very big barrier within language.
So it's an interesting. How would you say breathe in the language that you've learned?
I didn't learn the language. I'm kind of sad to say that I didn't actually learn anything. I kind of just fell onto the hands of my translator. But the smile was the biggest language connection of all things. There was a moment when I was with that Syrian family and I didn't have my translator, and there were just sweet smiles and hands on heart, and that's really the best language to speak anyway, which is the language of love. So,
viewers and listeners, we welcome your offering of what does breathe sound like in a language other than English. We'd love to share that amongst our audience. I vaguely remember my jumbled attempts at Spanish, and I believe respira is one. So viewers and listeners, please do call in and share with us. Back to your off-the-mat experience in terms of international travel, we've heard about Cuba and the Middle East. How is that happening in the United States?
How is...
Some of the off-the-mat experiences.
Some of the off-the-mat experiences. So, Off the Mat is an organization that I work with that is meant to take the principles of yoga and the students who are doing this practice to ground, to get flexible, to have endurance, to have patience, to be in the presence of grace. It's how to take those people out into the world in the name of service or activism or really just even in their relationships, just showing up in a much more whole way. And so, within the organization that I'm a part of, Off the Mat Into the World, it runs the gap between service trips abroad. We've been to many different countries. It also, we do social justice trainings. We do youth trainings for youth. I mean, it's really across the board. We're trying to show up in many different ways. With the political climate that we are in right now in the United States, Off the Mat is really focused on bringing trainings around social justice to anybody who wants to learn how to engage with people that don't look like them, don't live in the areas that they live in, maybe don't come from the means that they come from. And again, it's all about bridging the gap. Yoga means to come together and make whole. And that's not just about connecting your legs to your core in plank pose. That's about bridging the gap between cultures and races and identities, and giving us an avenue to remember that at the root of all things, we're here to explore the same thing, which is love.
That's magnificent. Well, we're going to take a little diversion and come to Carrington's next pearl, where she can share a little bit about how she clears her mind and prepares her day a little further.
Whenever I'm feeling cluttered or stuck or just kind of full, over full, I like to tap into a meditation of, it's called Purge Writing. And it's something actually I read that Einstein did every morning for 12 minutes. And Purge Writing is really just a free-form write, getting out a pen, paper, pencil, whatever you have, and just starting to write, writing down any thoughts that you woke up with that are just getting in the way of a clear path forward. No editing, no rewrites, just a free form writing for as long as you can, whether it's 3 minutes, 10 minutes, 5, 12, whatever you have. But it really is just a way of purging the mind, purging the body of energetic stickiness, that just really gets in the way of interacting with not only yourself but each other. And at the end of your writing period, the key is to either tear it up or put it into the fire, so that it's no longer in your area. It's not in your body. It's not in your trash can waiting for you, calling for you. It is done. It is done. So I would invite you, if you're feeling kind of overfull with clutter, try it out and see what happens for you. Maybe make a practice of it daily for a week and see how it affects how you show up in the world.
In perspective, when Carrington was teaching at Yoga Fest last week, she also offered a practice in this realm. Carrington, you comment how some of your students might have commented on this experience after class. What were they citing?
Well, specifically at the Yoga Fest, I taught a class called Fire Practice, the Art and the Ritual of Letting Go. And in the beginning part of the practice, we did a short meditation on things that are just, trying to call up all the stickiness and all the clutter that was pulsing in the mind and body. And then I offered about a 5-minute writing period where it was really just a free form writing process. They slipped at the end of that, they slipped that paper underneath their mat, and then we did a heat invigorating practice. It was very solid, very steady, but one that really generated a lot of heat and a lot of energy, so that we could have that energy to release what we had written down on the paper. So at the end of the practice, I have this really beautiful cauldron that a friend of mine brought back from Trinidad for me, and lit it on fire, and the students came and threw in their papers. And I think, many of those students didn't know me, so they didn't really know what to expect. And by the end of it, they were all into it. They were at the end of the class. Many people just told me what a great experience that was. They didn't know. I think one of the best compliments that I've ever heard is, "I didn't yoga could be like that." That's what I love to hear, because people have these ideas of what they think it is, and really there's so many ways that it could be. So I'm just grateful and privileged to be able to share one way that people could practice it. But they seemed to be into it, and I was happy about it.
It's a fascinating practice, and it's also something that one should be careful about trying at home for the first time. Be careful about creating a fire in a space that you're not accustomed to doing. We're going to attempt to share our Niyamand Minute again and pump up the volume. Our Niyamand. our Neomon Minute. Well, I will assure you that if you went to the neomon.com website and looked under Explore, that you could find several recipes that have been from the past, as well as ones that we continue to load. That's neomon.com/explore. Let's continue with our show with Carrington. Carrington was talking about her Yoga Fest experience, but also Carrington is an ambassador for this process of off-the-mat yoga, as well as her own passion of sharing this type of yoga where it's from the heart. There are programs that are coming up in the near future that I'd like to share. One of them is a spring detox retreat that's coming up this weekend in Asheville. She's sharing that with another wonderful teacher from Raleigh, Jen Bluestone, who has participated with You Call This Yoga on several levels, including at Yoga Fest. Can you share a little bit more about the detox retreat?
Sure. It's interesting because we'd had this detox retreat scheduled in the past, and Jen broke her ankle, and so we had to cancel. And we thought, oh, is this really going to happen? But when we put it on the books for April, back in 2016, we had no idea of the climate that we would be in politically, culturally, and so it couldn't be better timing. It is a detox retreat of the body and the mind and the soul. So it is. Yes, we'll have daily yoga classes, but also there'll be meditations and writing exercises and lectures and talks on ways to break habits that just don't serve us. And quite frankly, the state of our nation right now and the state of our world is requiring each one of us to show up in the best way that we can, and to be able to have a yoga class or have a retreat or something that we can use to get back into our center and to the reminder of who we are, and get detached from those things that really just take us away from purpose. I think if we can find those avenues, then find them, because they're absolutely necessary right now. So we're very grateful to be in Asheville, a retreat that's local to North Carolina, although we have some people coming from all over. So we're really excited to be having that.
Mm. So what I'm hearing is the practice of yoga is much more than the physical. There's so much of intention that comes from within and without, and how do we actually take it away from us and sharing it with others is as powerful as whatever we might be gleaning within. Mm-hmm. Yes, we have individual practices, but it's also about connecting with others in the world, as seldom can we live in our own Idaho perpetually. And that's the point here with Carrington and some of the programs that she participates in. She also has something called Unapologetic Power. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Unapologetic Power is a workshop that I'm teaching online, actually, with a colleague and friend of mine. Her name is Melody Moore, and she runs an organization, or she's running this program called Embody University, YOU University. And she is a sister within Off the Mat too, so she's used that platform to create her own teachings around body image and loving self, which is really, really beautiful. What I'm teaching, Unapologetic Power, is about using yoga, using meditation, and to be able to ground and to stay centered into the knowing of who you are. We are at our most powerful when we know who we are, when we know what we're made of, when we're not caught up in ego or any kind of diversions of other people's ideas of us, but we are at our most powerful when in any given moment we can stand in our truth. And so the practice that I'll be leading, that workshop I'll be leading, is about just that, about talking about how to find ways to get to your center, to remember who you are, to detach from those things that call for your attention or try to be your identity, so that we can get back to the root of us, the center of us, and stand firmly within that power. And the unapologetic part is, I think, especially for women, there can be some shame or some guilt wrapped around the word of power. Oh, we shouldn't do that. We should step aside. We should be second. We should be behind. And this is the unapologetic piece is no, you should be at the forefront. Stand in your truth.
Well, with that perspective in mind, I think it's compelling that we move to our third pearl of wisdom, where Carrington can demonstrate a little bit more about what she is speaking of.
Whenever I am feeling kind of out of sorts or maybe not myself, really the best way for me to land back into my body is to take the shape of mountain pose or Tadasana, which is a typical yoga pose that shows up in a practice. And you'll separate your feet underneath your hips and maybe stomp around a little bit. And then grounding your feet. Start to piece yourself together. You can close your eyes or keep your gaze at a soft point somewhere on the floor or the wall in front of you. But feel your tailbone lengthening, drawing your navel in, and beginning to not just kind of dump into the earth, begin to collaborate with it. So whatever you plug into, you have that much energy to rise up from. And then as that downward pressing energy starts to rise up through you, it goes all the way through you, through the crown of the head. And then once you feel that your strength is meeting your structure, take a deep breath. Big exhale. And then tap into an easy, mindful breath. But again, feeling yourself plugging into the power underneath you and feeling that much power rise up through you. Begin to integrate that power into your structure, into your breath, into your blood, into your cells, so that you remember just how powerfully supported you are. And in this way, you're not only grounding into the earth, but you're grounding into who you are, who you came into the world with or as. And in this way, you are supported in your presence because you are a part of everything. You are the ground, you are the air, you are all the elements, you are present. And when you are in the know of who you are, that is when you are most powerful.
What I really enjoy about Carrington's expression there, in addition to the internal component, which she is definitely radiating from, is also my physical component, which I operate from. Did you notice her feet hip-width apart, or essentially two-fisted? Did you notice her palms facing forward in a receiving position? But also, as I would like to extol, that it helps to stabilize the shoulder blades, which then helps to stabilize the head. So whether you're seated or standing, because this is about accessible yoga, it's not mandatory to be standing to create your power position, but in that sense of grounded, engaged, aware of where you are. The hands palms up might be a little awkward or quite awkward at first because we may not live that way. But that's the journey of exploring how to develop greater openness. You might use props such as blankets or pillows to get your hips and shoulders properly supported, your arms resting on something, maybe a little support for your head so that you don't have to lean forward to be upright, but that you might be more extended. Those are my physical nuances to prepare you. Carrington, any other thoughts in preparation for the power position?
I think what you said is right on the money. It doesn't have to look a certain way. You know, if you're sitting in a chair, feeling your feet on the ground is just as palpable as if you were standing on the ground. So if you do have feeling in your feet that you can, feel the earth rise up to meet you, that it's as much intention as it is actually feeling it. So plugging in as much as you can with that energy that is underneath you and taking in all the elements around you, even the sounds that you hear. Any of those are avenues to plug you into what's happening in the here and now. So I think what you said is right on the money.
Wonderful. Well, it's nice to be accurate occasionally on the show. Let's take a foray into some other realm that I'm not really clear on and have Carrington explain that. I'm reading here about race, trauma, and well-being as an off-the-mat, into-the-world experience in Durham at the end of May. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes. So off the mat, I'm so grateful that they are coming here to teach this workshop, because it's so incredibly potent and relevant in this moment. You had Michelle Johnson here not too far into the distant past, but she was here, and she's been a big social justice teacher in this area, and there are a handful of others as well. So I don't want to say that it has never been happening here before. It certainly has, but having Off the Mat here is just a really great honor, and it is a 4-day workshop for yoga teachers, for yoga students, for anybody who wants to understand. Again, it's all about bridging the gap. So to understand ways to integrate more fully into a community that you weren't brought up in, or that you don't know much about. After the election, there was just a feeling in the air of wanting to do something, but not sure of what to do or how to do it. So this is really an educational piece of the what and the how. And when, the trauma piece is that we all hold in our body the history of how we grew up, and even of the history before our history of how we grew up. It's in our DNA. And if we're not present enough to our own traumas and our own wounds, when we interact with someone else who also has traumas, if we're not present and they're not present, it can really just be a train wreck. So this workshop is really just about exploring who you are and getting the tools necessary in order to engage with people's own traumas, with their own wounds, with their own stories, in a way that can bring people together, not separate us and pull us apart.
Well, that sparks several thoughts on my mind, or in my mind, in terms of that trauma, because I've heard about how trauma can be an intrinsic experience that gets passed down to generations. Could possibly be 2 or 3 generations beyond the afflicted experience. So whether it's a short-term, temporary experience or something that's chronic, our bodies do have plasticity, as we discussed with David Emerson too last week, and that there are modalities to try to release some of that. I'm going to slightly diverge for a change and mention that next week's guest, Dr. Maria Alfaro, is coming in to us from California via Skype, where we'll be discussing TRE and neurogenic yoga. New terms, TRE, all in caps, stands for tension, stress, and trauma releasing exercises. It'll be a very fascinating show and some practice for you to explore. We'll explore that further. Carrington's experiences and programs and blogs and videos are available on her website, carringtonjacksonyoga.com. We're trying 3 as a charm today, and we're ready for that Neiman Minute. Well, if that didn't take care of any lack of power within your body, hopefully you've got the vibration going, your own boogie woogie in your chair or standing to feel the energy flowing. And speaking of energy flowing, Carrington will be flowing to a very energetic experience in Asheville this summer called Asheville Yoga Fest. Could you tell us a little bit more about your involvement with that experience?
Sure. Asheville Yoga Fest it is going to be an amazing collaboration of teachers and musicians and meditators and students and all avenues of yoga. There's acro yoga, vinyasa yoga, bhakti yoga, every possible yoga modality I think is there. And the organizers of the event are actually, one of them, Amanda, used to live in Chapel Hill, and that's how I know her. They've really worked so very hard to bring an amazing group of people there to deliver an amazing experience. So I'll be there teaching a few different classes. I'll be teaching the same class that I taught for you, Howie, the fire practice, the art and ritual of letting go. I'll also be teaching a class called Yoga in Action, which is a yoga class to kind of to go along with that idea of let's take these tools of yoga out into the world, off the mat. Let's do some good with what we're doing to ourselves. Let's contribute to the world in that way. So I'll be teaching that, and then I'll also be contributing to a panel on, again, that social justice piece of race relations, of accessible yoga, of, again, it's always bridging the gap. So it will be a panel discussion where people can really just ask any kind of questions around social justice that they may have been brewing and maybe have just been afraid to ask. So my piece of it, I'm super excited about. I'm super excited to be a student there and take with some friends that I know are going to be coming from all over the United States. So it's going to be incredible, and I can't wait.
And that's at the end of July, July 27th through the 30th in Asheville, North Carolina. Carrington mentioned accessible yoga, and it's time for me to put a plug in about the Accessible Yoga Conference that I'll be participating in a minor part as part of their panel on community yoga. That'll be happening in the third weekend of May in New York, as that organization, originally starting out in California, is expanding east with another conference. There'll be another one in California later in the year. At the Accessible Yoga Conference, we'll have some of the guests that we've had on the show, Jivana Hyben and Diane Bondi, but there'll also be national leaders such as Sherry Clampett, Jay Brown, and I believe the keynote is Matthew Sanford, as well as others that I'm just not citing now, but you can go to the accessibleyoga.org website, learn more. Our organization is a helpful sponsor of that, and we believe that accessible yoga is not just an abstract concept, it's little pieces of yoga that can be practiced, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual, or all the above. We'd like to thank Carrington Jackson of Raleigh and the world for sharing her perspectives on off the mat and in the heart kind of yoga. Any other thoughts that you'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with, Carrington?
I would just say, if you're curious, reach out to me on my website. I'm happy to help anybody who's looking for an avenue into a life that is of well-being and of purpose. So reach out on my website, carringtonjacksonyoga.com. But just follow your curiosity. It won't ever lead you in a negative way. If you're curious, there's a reason why. And so I would suggest just following it.
Wonderful. We thank our sponsor, Neomond, where you can go to neomond.com and look under Explore for their other fun and yum good health recipes. And I welcome your feedback. You can rate the show on the sidebar on the Nissan Communications website, where we welcome your feedback. You can view archive shows on YouTube on the You Call This Yoga channel, as well as the on-demand prompt on the Nissan Communications. Thanks to Amnon for his wonderful hosting. We look forward to seeing you next week with Maria Alfaro and learning more about neurogenic yoga.
are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.